Hey guys, welcome back. It's K2B Karen again, and thank you so much for joining me again on this lovely video. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to do that as well, and if you would like, you can follow me on my Instagram. Going straight into today's video, we will be discussing about object pronouns. Now, I do know that on, our lovely search engine or our YouTube platform, we do have so many YouTubers who discuss about the use of object pronouns, and there are loads and loads and loads of videos on object pronouns. However, this video is specially dedicated to object pronouns because I want you to be able to understand everything about object pronoun in this video. So make sure to watch it till the end, and also don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, when we talk about object pronouns, there are about 5 different groups that I want to be able to touch upon. And without further ado, we're going to go straight into the video. Now, the first group that you need to be particularly attentive of is called the indirect. Now, when we talk about the indirect pronoun, there's particular things that, we get into mind. But before we delve into that, I want to talk about 5 groups. And when we talk about 5 groups, the first group is going to be called Group A. Now, Group A is a composture of both indirect and direct pronouns. Now, you don't have to think what indirect and direct is, because there will be an easier way for you to grasp that meaning. But for now, I just want you to take a look at this group. Now, everything that I'm saying, it could be tough to catch up, so I have my teaching resources beside me over here so that it could be somewhat easier for you to grasp everything that I'm talking about. So in Group A, we have me, tu, nous, vous, and ce. This is basically a group that is made up of 5 different pronouns, and this is generally a group that's mixed with both indirect and direct. Now, why do I say both indirect and direct? Because I have removed specific object pronouns of he and she. So this list is simply indicating the pronouns that can be used for both indirect and direct. Now, this group is one of the most simplest group that you would see in the entire object pronoun sort of dictionary, and it is the most simplest to use. And we will look at some sentence examples, but before we delve into that, I want to look at Group B. Now, when we talk about Group B, these are all the direct pronouns, and it is made up of just 3 pronouns, which is le, la, and les. So if you have a notebook with you, it's very important for you to note these down, pause the video, and write all these down, and we will go into those in more detail. Now, Group C is called the indirect, which is lui and leur. So that means him and them. The next group I want to discuss about is Group D. Now, Group D is it's a sort of indirect, and it could be a complement to a verb, and that is e. Again, if you're not sure about this, it's completely fine because we will go through them in detail. Group E is also a indirect, but it could be a direct as well, and it is also complemented to the verb, and that is called en. So these are the 5 groups that I want you to take a look at, and it's very important for you to understand the order of these verbs. Of these pronouns. My bad. See, it could be a little bit confusing for me as well, but it's completely fine because we will go through them together. Now, when we say Group A, Group B, Group C, Group D, and Group E, it's very important for you to understand that Group A will always be before your Group B, and your Group B will always be before your Group C. Your Group C will be always before your Group D, and your Group D will always be before your Group E. So in other words, your object pronoun must always start with a Group A, if there is, or it should always start with a Group B, if there is a Group B, or if there's no Group A and B, it will start with a C, or it will start with a D, or it will start with an E, depending on what is available. Now, I know this can be very confusing, so we will look into some examples. So, let's say if we have a series of sentences that looks like this. Now, the first thing I want you to be able to understand is to be able to understand the difference when we say indirect and direct before we touch upon these 5 groups of object pronouns. Now, looking at the 5 examples of sentences that we can see, let's go over them one by one and let's discover if the verbs are direct or indirect. So if we're looking at the first sentence, c'est ton oncle qui nous conduira à la guerre. Now, it is your uncle who drove us, or who will drive us to the garage. Now, how do we know if this is a direct or indirect? The first thing you want to be able to do is think about the verb conduira. Now, conduira is, of course, a future tense, but just thinking of the infinitive form, which is conduire, we need to think if we can produce a after conduire. Now, here, à la guerre is talking about a place. So you want to think if you can say drive to. Can you drive to us to the garage? Does that make sense? Or would you say drive us to the garage? Now, if you say drive us to the garage, that basically is direct. If you say drive to us to the garage, it is indirect. Now, it's time to think which one sounds more grammatically correct. So take a moment, take that 5 seconds of a gap and think. Would you say drive to us to the garage or drive us to the garage? Yeah, that's absolutely right. Drive us to the garage. So in that way, you're going to say it's going to be a direct verb. Another example, if that seems too confusing. So, Jacques vous a-t-il expliqué ton absence? Now, if you're talking about expliquer, now thinking about the infinitive form, we have expliquer. Would you say expliquer à, explain to us, or would you say explique, would you say explain us? Now, both of them sounds grammatically correct, but which one sounds more grammatically right? Explain to us or explain us? So take a moment and let's think about that. Exactly. It is explain to us. So this is why in French we would usually write à before the verb expliquer. So expliquer à. That's why we would assume it to be an indirect verb. Now, I do know that there is no à after expliquer in this sentence. And then this is where the object pronouns comes into place. But we will stop there for a moment and we will continue thinking about the third sentence. So, il ne m'a pas répondu. So, he didn't respond me. Would you say respond to me or respond me? Which one do you think sounds more correct? There is your answer. So, répondez à. So, respond to, which is why we will use indirect. The fourth one, je ne vois pas ce qui te dérange. Je ne vois pas ce qui te dérange. So, I cannot see what is disturbing you. Now, would you say disturb you or disturbing to you? Yeah, there you go. Disturb you. And this is why we would make use of direct. Next, les atomes se divisent. So would you say, divide to us or divide us? And of course, because this is a reflexive, it gives you a moment to think, is it really direct or indirect? And of course, this is direct. Now, I do know that these are just 5 examples, and there's, of course, lots more verbs in French that, we can possibly think about. And I know that it's not easy, so it's completely fine if you've, sort of messed your way through these 5 sentences. But always, you need to think, when you have a verb in French, you want to think, you always want to try and put the verb, the preposition to after the verb to think if it's going to be direct or indirect and which one sounds more accurate to you. Next, I want to talk a little bit about object pronouns, so let's delve into that together. Okay, now there are 3 sentences that we have over here, and I want us to think, would we use group B or would we use group C? Now, if you've written down all of the notes that I have previously talked about at the start of this video, this section would seem relatively more easier for you to understand because you have your notes alongside with you. If you haven't made your notes yet, that's completely fine. Make sure to go over the start of this video and just drop down some notes here and there, and then we'll be good to go. So, for the first sentence, je vois ton fils qui joue dans le parc. Now, I see his son who plays in the park. So would you replace ton fils with le, la, les, or would you replace it with lui or leur? Now, that's where the idea of direct and indirect comes in. Now, if you're talking about lui or leur, it's when you are trying to do something to somebody. You know, the preposition to is very important. If there is no preposition in between, most of the time you're going to make use of the direct ones. So, time to think. Would you say, je lui vois jouer dans le parc? Or would you say, je le vois jouer dans le parc? Which one do you think sounds more right? And also, which one do you think would replace ton fils? That is a very big question. Now, ton fils, of course, is going to be indirect with the help of the verb voir, and this is why we will make use of the preposition pronoun le. Now, why are we making use of the pronoun le? Why are we not using la or les? That's because ton fils is actually a masculine noun, and we cannot make use of la or les because it's not feminine, and of course it's not plural, which is the reason why we would make use of le. The next one. Je vois que tu n'as pas encore fait ton travail. Now, we want to try and replace all that underlined bit there, and it's time to think, you know, is this giving me any sort of indirect phrase? Remember, if it's an indirect phrase, you're always going to see the preposition a at the front. And here we don't see any preposition a. So we would make use of either le, la, or les. And then it's time to think, which one would we use? Because we have que over here, we would use masculine. And this is the reason why our response is going to be je le vois. The third one, voulez-vous rencontrer Lucie? Now, Lucie, here, we're talking about Lucie. It's not a Lucie, it's just Lucie. And it is a feminine person, of course, you know? So we would make use of either le, la, les. And then it's time to think, okay, which one do we use? Le, la, or les? So take a moment, pause the video and think. Would you use le, la, or les? And there you go. You got your answer. The answer is la. So oui, je veux la rencontrer, because we're sort of trying to answer the question. And Lucie would be replaced with la over there. Now, it's time to go a little bit more in detail, and we're going to be able to think about the other sort of pronouns that we have. And on your screen, you would be able to see a series of 5 sentences, and here, all your responses would be a mix of either the indirect group B or either the direct group B or either the indirect group C. So, taking a moment to look at all these sentences, pause this video and try and write down all your answers in a notebook. And then, once you're ready, we're going to start off this video by looking at the answers together. So for the first one, ce petit garçon est très intelligent avec sa mère. Il, and then there is a blank, obéit toujours. Now, if we're talking about obéit, you know, we would have obéir, which is the infinitive form. And then, of course, you're going to obey to somebody. You're not going to obey somebody. It's going to be obey to somebody. And then it's the idea of indirect. Now it's time to think, would we use lui or would we use leur? Now, because the subject here is sa mère, this is the reason why we would use lui. Il lui obéit toujours. Not leur, because we're talking about one particular person. When we're talking about one person, we would use lui, which is the reason why we're using oui in this particular point. The second phrase, je vais parler à mon épouse et je vais blank demander pourquoi elle est fâchée contre moi. Now, here, demander is, of course, a indirect verb. And how do we know it's an indirect verb? Because you will demander à. You're asking to somebody. You can't ask somebody. You're going to ask to somebody. That's how it goes in French. So that's a little side note you can keep. So because we have demander and it is a indirect verb, it's time to think, would we use lui or leur? Now, you are talking to your spouse, so of course that is one particular person. If you are unsure about what the verb épose means, you can look actually at the pronoun, which is mon. And because mon is a singular sort of pronoun, you would have an idea that you have to use lui instead of leur. So in that particular blank, we're going to fill it with lui. The next one. Voilà un homme en difficulté. Il faut... and then there's a blank, aider. Now, it's time to think, would it be help to somebody or would you help somebody? You know, that's a big question. The answer would definitely be help somebody instead of helping to somebody. And then the question comes, would you use le, la, or les? And because we know that the subject is un homme, that's why it's going to be l'aider. Now, why do we add L apostrophe? It's because the verb that we have is aider and it starts with a vowel. So we need to use the apostrophe. Because if we use le and then aider, there's two vowels that goes together and that clashes. So you need to have L apostrophe aider. Number 4. J'ai un téléviseur, mais je ne, and then there is a blank, allume jamais. Now, here again, allume. You cannot turn on to somebody. You only can turn on something. And this is why this is a direct verb. And then it's time to think, would you use le, la, or les? And because it's en téléviseur, of course you would use le. And because we know that the verb starts off with a vowel, we're going to say l'allume. So it's going to be L, and then we're going to have an apostrophe behind that. The last example of this entire video, il est aussi grand que son père et il blank ressemble beaucoup. Now, when we're talking about ressemble, you can't ressemble somebody. You need to resemble to somebody. You can't resemble somebody. So resembling to somebody will give us the idea that it has to be an indirect verb. And because we have our subject as son père, which is why we're going to add lui instead of leur. And those are the 5 examples that helps you better understand your direct and indirect. Now, I do know that for the object pronouns, we discussed about 5 big groups, and I will touch upon a little bit on Group D and Group E in my next video. So be sure to check that out if you are staying around and hanging in there in my YouTube channel for a bit. And also, if you haven't subscribed, be sure to do that as well. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow me on Instagram. You would be able to find my Instagram account handle in the description below, so be sure to check that out as well. Until then, I'll see you in my next video. Bye!